A small plane flew into a ridge in the California desert and never came back down on its own terms. Both people on board were killed. The wreckage, burning in 5% humidity on dry BLM scrubland, likely started a wildfire that consumed more than 2,200 acres. This story is about a clear day, a straightforward cross-country flight, and a collision with terrain that the data suggests the aircraft never had the performance to clear. This is the Cessna 182T Skylane accident near Ridgecrest, California on the 7th of May, 2026. The aircraft departed Inyokern at 10:47 local and impacted rising terrain in the El Paso Mountains Wilderness 7 minutes later. The information we have is preliminary, drawn from the Aviation Safety Network, ADSB telemetry, local news reporting, and the NTSB preliminary record. But the basic shape of what happened is clear, and it raises some uncomfortable questions about mountain flying, density, altitude, and whether the aircraft ever had the climb performance the route demanded. The aircraft was a 2006 Cessna 182T Skylane, a 4-seat, high-wing piston single powered by a Lycoming IO 540 engine. It is one of the most common general aviation training airplanes in the United States. Reliable, forgiving at normal altitudes, familiar to almost every flight school in the country. This particular aircraft was registered to Top Flight Aviation, Inc., based in Corona, California. The planned route took the flight northeast out of Inyokern, field elevation 2,457 feet above sea level, and across the El Paso Mountains Wilderness toward Corona. The peaks in that wilderness reach 4,300 feet. The terrain corridors between them sit at 3,500 to 3,800 feet. The weather that morning looked fine on paper. Calm winds, clear skies, 10 miles visibility, temperature 28 degrees Celsius, a warm Mojave morning. That temperature is what matters. We'll come back to it. Now let's walk through what the ADSB data shows. The aircraft lifts off runway 33 at Inyokern at 10:47 and makes a climbing left turn, reaching 3,100 feet. 3 minutes later, the track dips to 2,700 feet. Then another descent before a recovery climb toward 3,000 feet. At 10:54, 7 minutes after departure, the aircraft is climbing at 900 feet per minute, ground speed 78 knots, indicated altitude 3,500 feet. At 10:54 and 13 seconds, the track ends. The surrounding ridgelines are at exactly that altitude. The highest peaks nearby reach 4,300 feet. The aircraft was at or below the terrain elevation at the moment the data stopped. Both occupants, the pilot, 28-year-old Ramsey L. Sherman, and his passenger, were killed on impact. The post-crash fire ignited dry desert scrub. By late afternoon, the blaze had a name: the Canyon Fire. There is one detail in the ADSB trace that investigators will examine closely. The track shows not one but several altitude dips after departure, a pattern of climbing, losing altitude, and climbing again, as if the aircraft was struggling to sustain its ascent. We'll look at what that may mean in a moment. Mountain flying, even in terrain as modest as the El Paso Mountains, has a textbook. The NTSB's safety alert on mountain flying is explicit. Before crossing any ridge, the aircraft must have a safe altitude margin above the highest obstacle, and that margin must account for actual climb performance, not published sea-level performance figures. Here is where the temperature becomes critical. Density altitude, that's the altitude the aircraft's engine and wings think they're at, was approximately 5,000 feet at Inyokern on departure. At 3,500 feet indicated, climbing through warm air, the density altitude climbed further toward 6,000 feet. A 182T at or near gross weight at density altitude 6,000 feet has a climb rate that can fall to 200 or 300 feet per minute under real-world conditions. Against terrain rising at the same rate as the flight path, that margin disappears fast. The textbook answer: climb to a safe altitude in the valley. well above the ridgeline elevation, before beginning the mountain crossing, or route south along lower terrain corridors that don't require crossing the wilderness at all. That's what the procedure says. What the investigation will now determine is whether the crew recognized the performance problem, and when. CFIT, controlled flight into terrain, remains one of general aviation's most persistent killers. What makes this case worth examining is that the mechanism is density altitude. The aircraft was physically incapable of climbing as fast as the terrain was rising on a clear day with no mechanical emergency. There is a second story here. The post-crash fire in 5% humidity in dry BLM scrubland burned 2,278 acres before containment. Fuel tank rupture on impact in hot, arid terrain is a known secondary hazard, one the NTSB has flagged in previous desert accidents. The NTSB will examine the ADSB trace, the aircraft's weight and balance at departure, density altitude calculations, the pilot's mountain flying training and total time on type, and the route selection itself. Public sources do not yet show total flight hours or time on the Cessna 182T. Those records are essential to understanding the experience picture. Ramsey L. Sherman had received his CFI certificate 100 days before this flight. That context belongs in the investigation file, not in a verdict. The NTSB has opened a formal investigation. Investigators are examining the wreckage, ADSB records, weight and balance documentation, and the pilot's training history. There is no official cause yet, and the full factual report will take months. We will cover it when it is published. Our thoughts are with the family of Ramsey L. Sherman, with his passengers' family, and with the community in Ridgecrest that watched the canyon fire burn across the desert for days after.